Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us as usual for another insightful, educative program with Professor Bolaji Akinyemi. From all the different countries you have joined this evening, thank you. Once again, for those who had joined and were waiting just before the program started, thank you for being there. Thank you for your dedication. We appreciate that. And Prof, welcome to the program this evening. Um, do you have some opening remarks for our viewers today?
Yes, good evening, Mr. Moderator. I'm glad to be here, and good evening to our participants on this program. Um, I do have some opening remarks arising from some of the comments that I made last week. There were some reactions, uh, some narratives which differed from mine. And I was going to read out at the beginning narratives, but then they've been overtaken by events in the past few days when finally the transition got on stream. So I thought, well, maybe the alternative narratives are no longer necessary. But just before we came on, I had a rethink that I should still share with you the alternative narratives for just for one reason, to let you know that there is no I know it all syndrome on this program. If you disagree with anything that I have said, or you have an alternative point of view, they are welcome. And I'll be glad to share this with uh, our other participants if you send them in. So I will still go ahead and read to you the two alternative narratives. One is from a retired professor who resides in Ohio, and it goes thus. The problem we have is not the legal interpretation of transition of power, but whether a loser of an election has to concede defeat before the winner is accorded the right and privileges of a victor. Unfortunately, the problem becomes more complicated when the director of GSA has the absolute power to declare the winner. I'm just paraphrasing the problem for brevity. The US regulations dealing with this problem is very simple. When you have two contestants who are civil and live by the rule of law in a civilized society. But the problem can be made very complex when you have one of the candidates who is a ragamuffin, who wants power by all means, and who does not live by any rule of law, but believes he's above the law, a despot. Another problem we have is the fear and lack of backbone of members of his party who cannot call him out. We will just have to ride this out with patience and let him be self-destructive. The other view is from a retired ambassador who lives in Atlanta, Georgia. And he wrote, Esteemed Professor Goodisa, regarding your views, I think there are just his major first appointments to fill posts at the National Security Council and Treasury. Even then, his appointment as UN Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield is a black lady. She has a good African experience and was once ambassador to Liberia. As you have observed in one of the sessions, it is obvious from the pattern of his White House and cabinet appointments so far that Biden has stuck with loyal and experienced hands with whom he has worked before. I am, however, surprised that Susan Rice did not make State Department. Let us await further appointments. I'm confident Biden will do right with the constituencies you mentioned. He always acknowledges the contributions of minorities, in particular blacks, for the rescue of his campaign and eventual success. So those are the two that I thought I would share with you. But as I've said, well, the institutions, even though the system was rattled, the institutions have won out and the transition process has started, the legitimate one. And so we thank God that the system has escaped a volcanic eruption, but there are still rumples that we will need to watch out for until January 2021.
All right, Prof. While still on that point, let me press you a little bit more because President-elect Biden has started naming these cabinet members, and there is a view here where some have praised him for picking people who have the experience, the diversity of the team, but others have also pointed out the fact that those he has picked are not necessarily those who would have featured as part of the campaign that got him into power. What are your views on the nominations? If you can elaborate a little bit more on some of these nominations, sir.
Well, um, first of all, let me start off by saying thank God that after 4 years of irritating delivery from the podium to America and the rest of the world, we now had a calm voice delivering a calm message that targeted the positive side of humanity in the Thanksgiving address to the American nation delivered by the president-elect Biden. It was comforting. It flew from his heart. And it reminded me of John F. Kennedy and even Barack Obama. I'm not saying that Biden is an orator. Obviously, he's not. But he drew from the same well of humanism that one associated with those two previous presidents that I mentioned. And the fact that he made it clear he was addressing America and he was addressing the world and not the ingratiating America first overtones or undertones that always characterized almost every speech from the White House in the past 4 years. So I welcome that. I have a few reservations about the security and strategic team. I mean, the fact that that was the first team to be appointed showed that that is the grade A team. There will be other appointments that will be made, but he's made the grade A team. I expected to see more diversity in that grade A team. I am not saying that the nomination to the United Nations is not welcome or not deserved. It is deserved. I am not ignoring the fact that you have the first Latina that will be heading the Department of Home Security. I expected that there would have been more. The point I keep making is that after 40 years in Washington, I expected President-elect Biden to be more conversant with a rainbow possibility of nominees and not simply say, oh, well, these are people I have worked with, they are experienced hands, and that is why the team looked less rainbow than perhaps it should be. I don't buy that. After all, when I believe it was Reagan went within the military and brought General Colin Powell to be, I think, his national security advisor. Anyway, he
Yes.
brought him to play a role. That was not, Colin Powell hadn't worked with Reagan before. Then George Bush, the elder, appointed Colin Powell chairman, Joint Services Chief. He had never worked with George Bush before. And then, of course, Bush the son also appointed Colin Powell to be his Secretary of State. George Bush the son went into the academia and pulled out Condoleezza Rice to be first his, I think, his national security advisor, before she then became the Secretary of State. So you can't tell me that Biden could not have gone into academia or to the private sector and come up with more experienced hands that will reflect a rainbow configuration in his grade A team. I think that is the point that I am making. Don't forget that after Iowa and New Hampshire primaries that reflect the overwhelming coloration of his grade A team, his political career was dead. It was the primaries in South Carolina, Virginia, and other states where you had overwhelming Black voters, Democratic voters, who resurrected his political career. Therefore, frankly, I am disappointed that we don't have more of a rainbow coloration in that grade A team. Finally, I am slightly worried that both Biden and all these his advisors are people who had, in the case of Biden, voted for American wars in the past. And these young advisors actually are to be found in the wing of the Democratic Party who like a projection of American power through military intervention abroad, whether in Libya, whether in Iraq, or whether in Syria. So I hope we are not going to get democracy riding on the horseback into troubled areas of the world. I hope that we will have a continuation of pulling back the use of American military, the projection of American military power where it will not be necessary.
Prof, I want to ask a question here because when we look at the cross section of the people he has picked, um, if he had done anything different in terms of Latino votes, in terms of maybe more black faces in there, wouldn't he have been accused of tokenism and just trying to appeal to that group rather than doing what is right for the situation that he has to address at this point?
No, in fact, it is now that he could be accused of tokenism. First of all, are you telling me that there are not? I mean, I just reeled out a series of names of people who had served other American presidents without holding public office before and had acquitted themselves creditably. I'm just giving you the names. I don't want to give you names of people who could have been appointed, who had served previous democratic administrations, and who are in academia, and who are in law firms, and who will have met, if you like, the conjunction of experience and rainbow coloration that I'm talking about. I also don't want to personalize this, but frankly, I would have looked for a Native American to now occupy the post that is given to John Kerry. There's no Native American on the team, so that there's a total absence of that.
Okay, thank you for that, Prof. One of the things that President Trump did in the last sort of 12 months thereabout was to pull out of some key agreements, including the Paris Climate Agreement. And President-elect Biden has already signified that he's going to join some of these agreements as soon as he takes office. However, the landscape has changed and things are considerably different now than they were 4 years ago when he was vice president. Is the president elect rushing into these new agreements? And what are your views on this?
Um, I get the point you're making, and perhaps one of the things one of the positive consequences of Trump's position on multilateralism is that to some extent he had a point that other countries were riding on the back of the United States. And now it strengthens Biden's hand in telling Europe or telling Asia that, look, these are the parameters of the kind of mutual concessions we should be making to each other. But if you expect the United States alone to make concessions, there is a constituency back in the United States that sees unilateral concessions by the United States as not being in the interest either of the United States or of the whole world. Therefore, let our concessions be mutual. It strengthens Biden's hand. So you are right that some circumstances have changed, especially in the case of Iran. But in the case of climate control, in fact, I think the situation is more frightening now than it was at the time when that agreement was signed. But I think Biden is absolutely right to signal to the rest of the world that we are back to occupy our seat at the table. And in consultation or in conjunction with our allies, we will try to refashion a new world order. We won't bully anybody into doing it the American way. That cannot be done anyway, given the power position of China, Russia, and what have you. However, they don't expect the United States to make unilateral concessions.
Thank you for that, Prof. And as we go on, just want to drop a message for our viewers. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat window. I will pass them directly to Prof so he can respond to your questions. But some of the questions that have come in here prior to the Prof, yeah. So some months back, August 13, to be precise, we saw President Trump broker this agreement, the Abraham Accord between UAE and Israel. And this week, there's been reports of the Israeli Prime Minister flying to Saudi Arabia to meet with the crown prince there, which the Saudis have denied of any such meeting taking place. Is Israel starting to pursue an aggressive foreign policy in reaching peaceful agreements with the Arabs? And what is that signaling for us? Because in August, the peace accord with the UAE, now it looks like something is happening with Saudi Arabia, and we know that there are other conversations that are going on. What are your views on this, sir?
Well, Trump had signaled at the time of the UAE agreement that there were other Arab states or Arab nations who were standing by, and he was expecting them to come in and sign on the line. The reason why the meeting or non-meeting with the Saudi Arabians is that Saudi Arabia will be the biggest catch. And it has the capability of actually pulling other Arab countries along. And given the role of Saudi Arabia as the guardian of the two holy sites, holy Muslim sites. It needs to test the water very, very carefully. In diplomacy, that meeting is what we call plausible deniability, in the sense that there's a meeting, there was no meeting. Nobody denies that there was a private Israeli jet that flew directly to a Saudi Arabian city. That's unique, never done before. Nobody is saying who were the passengers in that plane. All the Saudis are saying is there was no meeting between Netanyahu and the Saudi crown prince. Israeli sources are saying there was such a meeting. Well, there is no proof. Everybody's face is still saved diplomatically. But if you ask me, I think there are enough signs that such a meeting took place. However, events have not matured to the level where both sides will actually come out with the same statement. The Israelis are sending signals to the incoming Biden administration that the field, the Middle East field, is not the same as they left it 4 years ago. And the Saudis are also sending the same signal. But how far the Biden administration will go in promoting the Abrahamic agreement syndrome is what nobody knows. I believe, however, that Biden is going to seek to bring the Palestinians on board. Of course, that is easier said than done. One of the irreducible demands of the Palestinians is that there must be 2 states in that area. The way Netanyahu and the Trump administration had allowed Israeli settlements in Palestinian land has increasingly made the concept of 2 states a little bit difficult to achieve. So it's possible that Netanyahu haven't allowed the settlements to be built, may be prepared to pull back some of these settlements if that will bring the Palestinians on board, and if that will bring also Saudi Arabia on board. I think this is going to be one of the more interesting areas of diplomacy that we should watch. I will be interested in who will get the post of the special envoy to the Middle East.
Prof, talking about
got to be a clever person who has the confidence of the incoming president, but also who has knowledge of the Middle East.
Prof, while we're talking about this special envoy to the Middle East, in this case, this Netanyahu and Saudi case, there was someone from the United States who happened to be passing through one of the airports at the time when these other two people were missing. The U.S. Secretary of State, Pompeo, was also in the area. Do you see Pompeo as a possible power broker in the future, or maybe even a potential presidential contender?
Well, I mean, let's put it this way: the midwife was standing by in case the labor situation got that far, but obviously it didn't get that far. Um, yes, I mean, some of the behavior and statements made by Pompeo means that he's positioning himself for for some role in the Republican Party, and it is in the Trumpian wing of the Republican Party. Of course, American presidential elections, uh, especially at the primary stage, always reminds me of the presidential elections at the primary stage in Nigeria. All sorts of hats are thrown into the ring. Some just to have their names mentioned, that they once took part. Others are more serious. Obviously, haven't held the position of Secretary of State. I will not be surprised if he throws his hat into the ring. Mrs. Clinton came from that kind of background, senator, secretary of state, and then presidential candidate. So it's possible.
Thank you for that, Prof. Before I move on to the next question, there is a point here on YouTube, a question here on YouTube that says Biden succeeded because he promised reconciliations. How is he going to reconcile with the opposition in terms of their position on anti-abortion, anti-gay, and other more liberal policies?
Well, the fact that the majority that the Democrats have in the House of Representatives is a slim one. The fact that until January we will not know who will control the Senate, even if the Democrats win the two Georgian outstanding seats. There are conservative Democrats who he will have to battle with on some of these liberal issues that you have mentioned. His problem is not just going to be with the Republicans. Means that there are going to be what I would regard as liberal issues that he will not be able to expand upon. However, there are other liberal issues that he will have to honor his commitment. One is to the working class. Definitely, there must be an increase in the labor wage. There must be some form of palliative package, COVID-19 palliative package. Not no 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 not talking about a few crumbs dropping here and there. I mean something as massive as what he and Obama did to rescue General Motors and rescue banks during the last collapse of the American economy when they came in, then they went in 12 years ago. He will have to address palliatives to the working and middle classes. And I think it will get a lot of support for that from even Republicans. These are issues that will not be too contentious. But on all other contentious issues, even though personally he got, I think, 80 million votes. Now my last count, 80 million votes, and that's about a majority of 7 million votes. However, the configuration in Congress does not reflect that massive electoral majority. So it doesn't really have a mandate. That's what I'm trying to say, to push for some of the divisive liberal issues.
Prof, given that position, how does he then rescue himself from what some have already started to raise, that this just seems to be a third term of the Obama administration?
I mean, people come up with all kinds of categorizations. The United States presidential system has a tradition. When a party is out of power, people who served in that party go and find jobs in academia, in the private sector, in legal firms, prepping themselves and waiting for when their party returns to power. And that is the pool from which the incoming president then pulls the people who will serve him. For example, Cap Weinberger served 3 American presidents, and he occupied several roles. Director of budget, and he ended up as Secretary of Defense. But 3 American presidents he served. I have mentioned Colin Powell. He served Reagan, he served Bush the father, and he served Bush the son. So I mean, I can. There are people who served Obama who came from the Clinton administration. That is the way the game is played, so that you don't start building blocks from the foundation each time a new president gets in. He calls on the experience of his party, experience demonstrated by people who have held offices. So I don't see all this talk about Obama third term as being reflected in the people that Biden had appointed. You might as well call George Bush the father Reagan's third term, or Bush the son, were what? So really, it's now the way it's been phrased is a non-issue to me.
All right. Prof, let's move on to the United Kingdom, where the government has slashed their foreign aid budget from 0.7% of gross national income to 0.5%. And the act has prompted the resignation of one of the junior ministers. Now, while the UK Chancellor has defended the position of the government, are there wider implications for the developing economies that would have been beneficiaries of such aid? And to what degree is this kind of action likely to spread to other countries as they begin to look at how they handle their economy in light of the challenges coming from COVID-19?
Well, um, scholars of the aid program have always pointed out that the beneficiaries of any aid program are usually two. One is the country to which the aid is being given, and the second are the businessmen and companies from the countries giving the aid. And you often ask yourself who actually benefits more. Um, is it the countries collecting the aid, or is it citizens of the country giving the aid? Because companies from the aid giving are the people who supply, you know, air conditioners, who supply computers, who supply technical personnel whose salaries are then paid, with the result that you just wonder who at the end of the season gains more. Secondly, I believe we should stop this spoon feeding of developing countries. It simply removes the responsibility of looking at their own resources to build their own countries. When there are when there are disasters and unforeseen disasters, yes, one can look for palliatives that will come in because they are not foreseen. But aid in itself as part of development strategy, uh, I've never really signed on to that. So having said that, one must be careful because one must be aware that all developed countries now face the crisis of allocation of resources arising from the COVID-19 issue. They must find money for palliatives for their own economy. And this money must come from the treasury. So if you are looking for places where to cut funds or to source for funds that you will then use for domestic resuscitation of economy, it is usually the foreign aid budget. So I'm not surprised. I expect to see more of this. And it is usually when they've then stabilized their own economy and that economy and their GDP starts to yield positive results that they can then, from the excess, look for what to put in the aid package.
Thank you for that. Before we move on, there is a key point I want to put to you, sir. Just going back to the United States, and it's President Trump choosing to pardon the ex-national security advisor Michael Flynn. Uh, Now we know that Flynn had admitted to lying while he was dealing with some during some questioning. Do you see this as a very troubling uh, act on behalf of the outgoing president?
No, I don't. The man with the worst reputation for what I will call the abuse of the power of the president was Bill Clinton. Not only was the list so extensive, he pardoned his own half-brother and pardoned people who were accused of all sorts of criminal shenanigans. So, I mean, for people who are familiar with this program will know that I am not one to defend Trump on any issue, but he has not been the worst offender when it comes to abuse of the power of the president to pardon. I believe that, again, this is one of the issues from the 1778 Constitution that perhaps Americans need to, to look at. The issue that I even believe is more pressing is what is being floated by conservative constitutional constructionists that the president can pardon himself, that the way the power of the presidential act was, provision in the Constitution was phrased, it didn't put any limit at all on how the president can exercise that power of pardon. The liberal constructionists have argued that there is an overriding principle that a man cannot be a judge in his own case, and that therefore for a president to pardon himself for charges that have not been leveled against him makes him a judge in his own case, and that therefore he cannot do that. Of course, this is then going to, if he does, he's going to end up in the Supreme Court. And given the 5-4 judgment that was given by that Supreme Court yesterday on the case involving New York and religious organizations, well, I wasn't surprised that the new justice on the Supreme Court voted the way she voted, because she's a very strict constructionist. It's like she was saying, well, if the religious people want to kill themselves, well, let them kill themselves, but the Constitution says they have the right of religious freedom. Frankly, it's a judgment that didn't make any sense to me. But at least I can see her reasoning. So you can also see her reasoning if Trump pardons himself by saying there was no provision in the Constitution limiting his power as to who to pardon, who not to pardon.
But, Prof, I have a question here. Do you foresee any situation where President Trump will, once he's transitioned at the inauguration on the 20th of January, do you see any situation where Trump could actually go to jail for any of the things he had done? And would he be the first US president to face such a thing?
Well, from what I said a few minutes ago, if he pardons himself, then it becomes a constitutional case. If he doesn't pardon himself, I think the cases that he will face are already in the offing. They have to deal with things he did before he became president, affecting the Trump Foundation, the Trump businesses in New York, probably tax evasion, which Americans tend to take very seriously. Those are clear cases which will have nothing to do with presidential power. I don't believe any American president has ever been charged to court, not to talk about going to jail. Trump will be the first one. And let me express my own position on this matter. I think that having seen what someone who does not believe in the rule of law can do with the powers of the presidency, having seen how close America, came to well, becoming a banana republic, not just because of the elections, but because of the behavior of a sitting president. The Americans themselves may need to make an example of Trump by charging him to court on criminal issues that are strong enough to sustain cases. Not because of Trump, but because of somebody else of Trump's worldview who may be preparing to come in also and behave as if he's above the law. I believe that the United States needs to send such a strong signal that they will not allow this impunity to happen again.
Okay. Thank you for that, Prof. We have about 5 minutes to go, and there's some questions here on YouTube that I will paraphrase here. I think what this person is saying is trying to get your views on what we think the Biden administration's foreign policy will be towards Africa. What kind of approach do we think they're going to take towards Africa, particularly um, when you have uh, American billionaires who have been investing in Africa and who may or may not be getting the returns on their investment in Africa, and wanting to know if these kind of billionaires would then put pressure on Biden to have a more favorable foreign policy approach towards Africa.
Um, I'm sorry, of course, I don't know everything. I'm not really aware that that's a critical issue that can become, that could arrest the attention of an incoming Biden administration quickly. What I will serve notice on is what is going on in Ethiopia, what's going on in Cote d'Ivoire, what is going on in Guinea, Cote d'Ivoire and Guinea, Tanzania, issues arising out of elections that are not credible and that are not transparent. And of course, in the case of Ethiopia, the civil war there that is about to set alight countries in that part of Africa. These are the immediate issues that the National Security Advisor, probably by June, will have to address. And I believe that Uh, uh, um, the Trump administration is going to be on the side of democracy, is going to be on the side of human rights, and I think is going to seek to exercise some restraining influence on African governments who breach their own constitution in either term elongation or lack of credible elections. I think those are the immediate issues that will come to my own attention if I were occupying that seat.
All right, and finally, in the last 2 minutes, a very talented footballer passed on this week. Prof, I don't know if you were a sportsman when you were younger in school, but were you a fan of Diego Maradona?
No, actually, I mean, I recognized him as a genius on the field, but a flawed genius when you combine his activities on the field with his activities off the field. Um, it's probably, well, between him and Pele, I wouldn't pick who was the best footballer of our age, but definitely he ranks up there. It's either him or Pele or he's 50-50. He was a genius. He alone could dribble past 11 members of the opposition and still score a goal. And I'm not including the hand of God, in that display of talent. But he had the Achilles heel of not being able to control his life off the field. But it doesn't detract from the fact that he was a football genius.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Uh, there's a comment here on YouTube, but we've run out of time, and that will be my get out of jail card on this particular one. uh, Thank you very much, Prof, and thank you to our viewers who have stayed on. Thank you for the comments on YouTube. I hope I did justice to your comments, particularly the ones that I paraphrased. But thank you so much for joining. And we will be here again next week, same time, 8 p.m. in Nigeria, 7 p.m. in the UK, and whatever other time that is for you in the other nations you've been joining from, for those joining from the US as well. Thank you very much for joining. Prof, do you have any last words before we go?
No, just to thank again our other participants on this platform. It's been an exciting week.
All right. Thank you very much, our viewers. See you next week.